Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you are, and welcome to another Richard's Rock Rambles. Richard Fulmer here, and today we're going to carry on looking at bands' second albums, and this album for this band would be the one that really set them off on the right path. Their debut album was okay, it had some fairly good songs on it, but it wasn't really what they would go on to become, what they would really go on to sound like. It was a starting point. So I'm talking about the Canadian band Rush, one of my favorite progressive rock bands, especially from the 70s, that era, the early 70s, where a lot of great progressive rock bands, especially out of the UK. But this band came out of Canada. Three guys in the beginning: Geddy Lee on bass and vocals with those really high-pitched vocals in the beginning, Alex Lifeson on guitar, and him and Geddy Lee were actually at school together, so they knew each other pretty well. And a guy by the name of John Rutsey on drums. So this would be the debut album, simply entitled Rush. And like I said, there were some good tracks on here: Finding My Way, Here Again, In the Mood. Working Man was probably the biggest song off here, and I think they actually played that track right up until the end. Unfortunately, Rush are no longer around due to the untimely passing of the drummer Neil Peart a few years ago. Really sad, but he was struggling with illness. So, and like a family, this band, and once he'd gone, that was the end of Rush. But they had a really good run. I mean, they started in '74 with this debut album, and they went right up into the 2000s. So that was John Rutsey there in the middle. And he suffered from diabetes. And so touring wasn't that great for him. He couldn't keep up with them. And so he dropped out of the band. They had to find a new drummer. And it was the find of the century. They got a guy by the name of Neil Peart, who was not only an amazing drummer, but he would go on to become their chief lyricist. So he would write all the lyrics pretty much for Rush right throughout their career. And this guy had an amazing way with words, especially in the early days of Rush when they had all that sort of fantasy thing going on. He was great at writing. Sometimes it was a little difficult for Geddy Lee to actually sing those words, because writing it down on a page and actually conveying that in a song is not always that easy. But they got it right. And they become such a powerful trio in rock and especially in prog. So the second album was called Fly By Night, and it was recorded at Toronto Sound in December 1974 and released on February the 15th the following year, 1975. And it was on the Mercury label, and it was produced by Rush and a guy by the name of Terry Brown, who would actually go on to work with them for many years, I think well into the 90s probably. And then they got a few new producers. They also worked alongside producers, so they really knew what they wanted. The album got to number 9 on the Canadian charts and went platinum in the States and in Canada, their home country. They're really well loved in Canada, and they obviously had to break in America. First album didn't do much. In fact, they would only really become big in America after about 3 or 4 albums. But this second one is where the Rush sound was born. I'm talking about Fly By Night, of course, and there's that great cover of that owl. And then at the back you got the three guys. So that's the new drummer at the time, Neil Peart. There's Geddy Lee, and that's Alex Lifeson. These are the days when the guys were still wearing those flowing kimonos and robes. They were very much the look of the 70s. They would become a lot more minimalist in the 80s and the 90s, as even in their sound. They would strip it down. No longer would there be long 7 or 8, 9-minute songs. They would strip things down. But I love the early period of Rush. I think all the way up to Permanent Waves or Moving Pictures. After that, in the 80s and the 90s, a lot more synthesized. The guitar had to take a bit of a backseat, Alex Lifeson. But this is definitely still a 70s sound. Excuse me, I'll just need a sip of water. So what are the tracks on here? There are some amazing tracks on here. The first one is called Anthem, and it really is like an anthem. Just some incredible bass work from Geddy Lee. What a bassist. I mean, this guy is amazing. And if you think about it, there are only three of them on stage, and many years later, he would have to do the singing, play the bass, do the keyboards, do all that pedal work as well. And the sound that they came up with, you wouldn't think it was just three guys. So that was written by Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson and Neil Peart. So all three of them. And like I said, Neil Peart was the lyricist. Then there was a song called Best I Can, Beneath, Between and Behind by Tor and the Snow Dog. Probably my favorite track on the album, with that really growling bass. And that's another track that would go on to become a staple of their live shows, simply because it's so epic. You know, typical prog music, 3 or 4 different parts to the song. In these days, Geddy Lee's vocals are extremely high. Now, you can either like it or you don't. I mean, a lot of people I know can't stand his voice. It's just too much. It's like Burke Shelley from Budgie. I don't mind it. Later on, he would bring it down a notch in the 80s and the 90s and later on, because he couldn't do that anymore. I mean, he already was in his 20s. And so he toned it down a bit, and when the music changed as well. But for me, it's part of this particular 70s sound. So those are all the tracks on side 1. And By Tor and the Snow Dog had 3 different parts. At the Toves of Hades, Across the Sky, actually 4 parts. Third part is Of the Battle, and then Epilogue is the last part of that track. So you see what I mean by epic. 4 different parts to it. When you could still bring out albums like that, I don't think you can get away with it today. Or if you do, it's not going to get played in the radio much. That was another problem with Rush, and especially the prog rock bands, is to get their stuff aired. Because, you know, most DJs wanted 3-4 minute songs, so these guys weren't doing 3-4 minutes. I mean, this was... By Tor and the Snow Dog was 9 minutes long. Best I Can was 3, 4, 3. So, yeah, that was quite a long track. Then on side 2, we had the title track, Fly By Night. Then there was a song called Making Memories, which was only 2 minutes and 56 seconds. So that's quite a short song. Rivendell, which I think is actually a place near where they were brought up, or near where they stayed. And the last track, In the End, and that was another 6 minutes and 51 seconds. Just some amazing, the lyrics in this album, you could see that having Neil Peart in the band gave them a whole new dimension. I mean, his writing was just incredible. And obviously the musicianship, it was really good here, and it would just get better with each subsequent release of Rush. So you had Alex Lifeson on electric guitars, 6 and 12 string acoustic guitars, Neil Peart on percussion, Geddy Lee on bass guitars, classical guitars, and obviously all vocals. So that was the album. And after this, you would get an album called Caress of Steel, which was very similar, but it was panned by the critics. I think it was only once they got into A Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres, or 2112, that was probably the album that really started them to go off. But for me, this is the starting point for Rush. This was okay for what it was. It was basically like Led Zeppelin. Obviously, these guys had listened to a lot of Zeppelin. Zeppelin was still pretty big news around 74, 75. And they obviously influenced many bands. In fact, a lot of Zeppelin's music has prog elements to it. So you can see why they gravitated to Led Zeppelin. So there we go. Rush, one of Canada's best exports. Probably, in my humble opinion, the best thing that ever came out of Canada music-wise. And if you haven't checked it out yet, or if you know Rush but you don't know the early stuff, that's a great place to start. Have yourselves an excellent week. Look after yourselves. If you haven't done so yet, please, down below, give me a thumbs up or subscribe if you haven't yet. And take it easy, and I'll catch you guys again soon. Cheers.